Zoom webinar just takes a couple minutes for attendees to come in. So we'll just take a few minutes as we begin and to let people get sorted. We're glad you're here. This is our fourth regional presentation in a series of presentations over the course of the 2-week global fair. And this one is Central and South America. Just as a reminder, as people do come in, this is formatted as a webinar in Zoom. So you'll see across the bottom that you have a Q&A box. That's where you can type any questions that you have for the directors. Our staff will moderate those and call them out to the directors during the call. And we are recording and posting this to YouTube for those that are not able to make it right now. But use this as your time. This is the resource to you to talk to the source. So anything in the Q&A, hopefully we'll be able to get to. I'll just give a couple more minutes. Okay. Well, I will kick this off and remind everybody that you have the opportunity to type your questions in the Q&A. So we will dive into our Central and South America presentation. Before I show you who is here today with us, I just wanted to remind you that this is part of a series of sessions going on over the course of the next 2 weeks. So typically we have an in-person global fair. We couldn't do that this year, but we're really excited about the virtual opportunities that we've been able to offer. And you can find a full list of events at Plus Global Fair 2020. That's one of the links on the screen below. Also, if this is your first global fair event or your first chance at being able to look at what the IQP application looks like, the best place to start is Plus Off-Campus IQP. That will be your one-stop shop for what to do next when it comes to considering an off-campus IQP. And then finally, hopefully you've been in there before, but eProjects is going to be where you can research project opportunities, start your application, and pretty much get all the information that you need about what to do next. So without further ado, I'm going to turn off my screen share for just a moment so you can see the directors that are here with us today. So on our panel, this lovely smiling group, we have the Asuncion Paraguay Project Center represented by Professor Rob Traver. We have the Cuenca Ecuador Project Center with Professor Lorene Elgert and Courtney Kurlanska. Thank you both. Our Costa Rica project centers, so we've got two in Monteverde, Costa Rica and San Jose, both directed by Professor Melissa Bells. Our Panama City, Panama Project Center, directed by Professor Aaron Skulich, and our San Juan, Puerto Rico Project Center, directed by Professor Lauren Matthews. So thank you all for being here. The way we'll structure this is each director has a couple remarks about their center. They'll give you a brief overview, and then we'll dive into our questions. Just bear with me one more time as I share our first screen. And we'll kick it off with the Paraguay Project Center.
You're muted.
Professor Traver, just give us 1 second. We just need to make sure we unmute you. There you go.
Yep.
Oh.
Hello, students. My name is Rob Traver. I'm the director of the Paraguay Project Center, current director. And I want to take about a minute to walk you through the slide to highlight some of the projects and the activities and the reasons why the Paraguay Project Center is there. Note that it's a D-term project center, and it's focusing on poverty elimination in the country And it requires quite a commitment to Spanish language proficiency. I think overall, if you had to walk away from this, you'd say, well, this is probably like a mini Peace Corps experience. Let me walk you through a little bit of this. As you can see on the left-hand side of the slide, that says the reason. Paraguay is a developing country. It's poor and uneducated, are among the most disadvantaged in South America. So it requires getting down in the dirt to help. We do a lot of stuff in rural setting and a lot of things based on farm and natural resources. And because very few Paraguayans speak English, we need to have our Spanish in pretty good shape. And so that's quite a commitment, and more about that later. Here are the projects. Basically, we're doing rural development. This includes sustainable agriculture, ecotourism, improving local cooking methods and water and energy supplies. We analyze food systems and other infrastructure. There's quite a bit of environmental education. And you'll find you'll be speaking Spanish pretty much all day and all evening. Those are the projects. Life is basically 5 days a week. You're living in a humble but comfortable cabin on a residential ag technical high school. You're there with teammates, 4 or 5 of you at each of these cabins. That's 5 days a week. And you make your own food, and we have ways of procuring the food and the rest of it. And then on the weekends, you're in Asuncion. If you're wondering about Asuncion, if you look at the picture on the rightmost, where you're standing on a bridge overlooking the Paraguay River, in the distance is Asuncion. It's about 4 million people. It's the capital of the country. It's a large, thriving Latin American city. And there's plenty to do on Friday and Saturdays and Sundays, and that's where you spend the weekends. Along the way, there's a weekend trip to the famous Iguazu Falls in Brazil, and other opportunities to get out and about. In the rural areas, you'll often encounter another language called Guarani, and if you want to, you can try to pick up some of that. We've got holler monkeys in the trees, but overall, think that you're in a rural setting, doing rural agricultural natural resource projects 5 days a week, and then on the weekend, you're in a Latin American capital city. I should note that Professor Angel Rivera, who is in the Spanish department, will be taking over the directorship of this center for those of you who would be there from 2022 and on. In any case, look forward to your questions, and in particularly ask me about Spanish proficiency. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And the Ecuador Project Center.
Hi, everyone. I'm Lorene Algert. I'm the co-director of the Cuenca Ecuador Project Center. And I co-direct it with Professor Courtney Kurlanska, who's there, who's also here and available to answer your questions. So we'll both have a piece to say. So I'll just walk you through this slide that sort of gives you my 4 highlights of the Ecuador Project Center. I think the best parts of the Ecuador Project Center, first of all, are the projects. The projects are sponsored by grassroots organizations, community organizations in Cuenca and around Cuenca in the rural areas that focus on sustainability, environmental sustainability, and community development for the most part. We have hosted, or we have had hosts for the projects in rural areas for rural community tourism projects with Andean communities. Our students have worked with sustainable agriculture with farmers along riverways to find ways to avoid agricultural runoff into the farm, into the rivers. We've had projects with a local city museum, a 450-year-old museum in Cuenca, Ecuador, that is also home to a group of cloistered nuns. And if you don't know what cloistered nuns are, they're nuns that never leave the building. So they're cloistered in the museum. So some really interesting and diverse projects. We've got projects, we usually offer projects both within the city, within Cuenca, and also out in the countryside. You know, half an hour, 45-minute bus ride out of the city, you get to these beautiful Andean mountains. There's tons of communities there, and we work with some of them. Living in Cuenca is just great and fun. It's a walkable, super walkable city. It feels in some ways like a village, but it's really cosmopolitan also. It's historic. The center of Cuenca is a UNESCO World Heritage Site for its historic beauty. So it's a very lively place. There's lots of public life, a lot of plazas to hang out in, and it's just a very nice and walkable place to live. You'll find that you can walk to most places in Cuenca. You have lots of nice travel opportunities from Cuenca. So Ecuador is an immensely geographically diverse country with the Andes running through the center. You have the Amazon to the east, and then you have a coastal region to the west. And all of these regions are accessible from Cuenca during your long weekends or before or after the program. But there are also, for the weekend travel, there's a lot of really nice places right around Cuenca. And we actually have an excursion that we usually take students out to see some of the artisans in surrounding communities. We visit a guitar maker, we visit some traditional weavers, some ceramicists, etc. So it's good fun. Also, as with Paraguay, we require you to have some Spanish. So we require you to take some Spanish before you go, and you can expect to improve your Spanish while in Cuenca. There is some English, but you'll be speaking a lot of Spanish, and most of our sponsors, while some of them speak English, they prefer to speak in Spanish. So since we are the visitors, we communicate in their language. And so many students have come back from Cuenca and said one of the most valuable things that they did was learn and become a little bit more proficient in Spanish. So that's a really important part of our project center as well.
Thank you. Let's dive into Costa Rica.
Hi everyone, I'm Melissa Bells. So I'm the director for the 2 separate project centers that are in Costa Rica. You would determine which one you wanted to go to. You could add both, but Monteverde and San Jose are distinct project centers. So the primary focus for both of them is sustainability. If you are in environmental engineering, environmental science, or a minor, these projects would be a great fit for you and for your overall CV at the end of college. So if we go, one thing to look at is the place. So Monteverde is a rural, small town. It's a small tourist community. So it has a lot of activities, a lot of restaurants. It's also a pretty amazing small scientific community with a lot of people doing great research. And San Jose is very much a big Latin American city with a lot of pedestrian downtown and shops, and there's a lot of up and coming green movements and really cool communities that are coming up. So we don't need Spanish. We don't require Spanish for either of these sites, but I love to bring students who can speak Spanish. We need them for the projects, but it's not required. And you would take Spanish classes in either of these places for the first 2 weeks for just half days while you're working on your projects. So I assume next year that everything will be good and we'll be going to these project centers. So they do offer very different opportunities depending on the type of place you want to spend your IQP. Either way, I know that these projects that we're doing can be done remotely, as we're gonna, that we've planned for. And the projects that we work on in Costa Rica vary from Monteverde to San Jose. So in Monteverde, they're smaller nonprofits. They're usually based around conservation, a lot of trail planning, and town infrastructure improvements, which the town definitely needs. There's usually work about climate adaptation and community development. So in San Jose, we work with bigger agencies that are generally working on environmental improvements in some capacity, but we also regularly work with the firefighters, so doing fire protection planning and in sustainable fisheries planning. some corporate responsibility, social responsibility projects happen with some of these bigger agencies too. So both of the project centers require a lot of walking. Monteverde is pretty hilly. And of course, in San Jose, there are buses and Ubers and taxis, but often students just end up walking. Neither city is oppressively hot because they're both at high elevation. So I think that is everything for these two project centers, sort of compared and contrasted. And there is a website that shows all of the projects that we've had over the last maybe 7 years or so. And it's a WordPress, it's a wp.wpi.edu/Costa Rica. So sorry I didn't put that on there, but hopefully you can find it. Thanks.
I'll mention that a number of project centers have an additional website that usually is a catalog of past projects and more information. And you can find those links on eProjects. On the right-hand sidebar, there's a link that says Project Center website. So thank you, Melissa. And we'll go on to Panama.
Hello, so I'm Aaron Sekulich. I'm in civil and environmental engineering, and I've run the Panama Project Center since about 2014. I think you'll see graphic design, not really one of my skills. These are photographs that I myself have taken when I was in Panama. On the website, I've put a great deal of effort into producing the Panama website, and I'm terrible with technology. Like, I had to write all of the documents on a typewriter and then scan them. But you can find a huge amount of information about the different projects. We've done everything from Copa Airlines, the national airlines, all the way down to a two-person NGO that is looking at income disparities and things like that. This year, we have a project with a church parish on how to digitize their 500-year-old records. If you can't find that stuff, send me an email. I'm happy to talk about it. But what I wanted to talk about is really what I like about Panama. I have been all over the world. I have been hither, I have been yon, up and down, front and back. And there is no place in the world like Panama. A little portion of every other country is represented in Panama. 10% of the population of Panama is Chinese. 5% of the population is from other Asian countries. There are, of course, a large part of the population from European heritage. And in Panama in particular, the indigenous people live with a greater deal of autonomy than in some other countries, so long as they do not mess with the Panama Canal. That's really the only thing the government cares about. Panama has only been a fully independent country for 20 years. Until the end of the millennium, it was a U.S. colony. Currently, the currency in Panama is the U.S. dollar. You don't need to exchange anything. Because of this, a lot of people in Panama speak English. So we start out with a 3-day event at a language school and kind of a cultural center. But me personally, when I started directing Panama, the only thing I could say in Spanish is I can summarize the plot of the movie RoboCop 2, or as they call it in Panama, RoboCop 2. Very interesting película. So you will do better if you are open to learning some Spanish and not embarrassing yourself when you try to order a hamburger, as I have done many, many times. I'm getting pretty good at the food now, frankly. Outside of Panama City, of course, there's the canal, which is the single most important structure on the earth. Modern life would not exist in the way that we know of it without the Panama Canal. Panama City is by far the most cosmopolitan city in Latin America. Some people will say Rio de Janeiro, but it's okay. People are allowed to have incorrect opinions. Those people have them. It's Panama City. Everything you want in an urban area, you can find in Panama City. Once you get outside of Panama City, there's the biodiversity, the jungles, the indigenous culture. Me personally, I focus on museums and seafood, and Panama just absolute top grade in both of them. If you like eating some camarones, I can give you some recommendations. So obviously, I have deviated pretty significantly from the script I had written up. I'm not really sure anymore what I have and have not covered. I hope my enthusiasm for Panama has come through. And if you got any questions, you ask them now, you send me an email later, send me a telegram. I am always happy to talk about Panama. Bueno.
Thank you so much. Your enthusiasm came through. And Puerto Rico.
Hi, everyone. I'm Lauren Matthews. I am the Center Director for the Puerto Rico Project Center. I also direct the Hawaii Project Center, and I am a professor in the biology department where my teaching and research are both in ecology. And that sort of informs the kinds of projects that I seek at both of the project centers that I direct. The Puerto Rico Project Center is potentially, I think, the second oldest project center at WPI. I believe the first one was Washington, D.C., but the Puerto Rico Center is approaching 30 years old now. So that means we have a pretty large footprint on the island and pretty strong relationships with a few sponsors with whom we've been working for potentially more than a decade with some of our sponsors. And that gives us a lot of advantages as far as identifying really interesting projects for students and really having some local impact and working with local communities. So as I mentioned, I am an ecologist, and the previous center director for Puerto Rico was also interested in environmental problems. So the focus of the project center is primarily on environmental problems and sustainability issues. So that includes, we do a lot of projects in the area of co-management of environmental resources. So this philosophy of really working with local communities and really local communities driving environmental management plans and projects, that's certainly gaining traction on a widespread area in a general sense. But in Puerto Rico, we find that virtually every sponsor we want to work with, I'm sorry, my cat is being very obnoxious. Virtually every sponsor we want to work with is primarily interested in our student teams working closely with local communities. And our student teams generally seem to find that really rewarding. We also do projects related to climate change impacts and the possibility of increasing renewable energy options on the island. We have done projects and will continue to do projects in sustainable agriculture and in urban development. So I know all of the project center directors have commented on Spanish language skills. I would say with respect to Puerto Rico, the degree to which Spanish language skills are helpful may be surprisingly high. It certainly surprised me to realize how useful Spanish language skills are, but they are not necessary. So many students who do their projects in Puerto Rico, I would say maybe half of them have some background in Spanish, but they are not particularly comfortable with it. And the other half probably has essentially no Spanish skills at all. So as long as you are willing to sort of open your mind and learn some basic, very basic conversational skills in the process of working on your project, you're going to be fine. You may need to have someone on the team be able to read a little bit of Spanish, but for the most part, this is not necessary. All of the sponsors speak English at least well enough to communicate with students. Where you may find that Spanish skills are necessary is with that community engagement kind of work that I have already mentioned. So then the last thing I'm going to point out is that, like all the other project centers you've already heard about, we do have a WordPress site. So that is here, and you can figure out the pattern for naming those, and you can find any of our project center WordPress sites. But the Puerto Rico site does have all of our past projects for the last probably 10 or 15 years, as well as an FAQ section where you can find a lot of, probably get a lot of your questions answered. But you can also feel free to contact me at any time if you would like to get more questions answered in a more personal way. And my contact information is right there on the Puerto Rico website. Thanks, everyone.
Great, thank you all so much. It's nice to hear a short overview and kind of something to enhance what we're able to see on e-projects. So before we dive into questions, I just wanted to mention that if you do have general questions about the application process, you can always reach out to global@wpi.edu. I know for some of you, this is just the beginning as you get back on campus and realize it's time to apply. So do know that we're here to field those questions and walk you through the process. You also may have received an application liaison email. This year in our virtual environment, we're just trying to make sure that our door is open in as many ways as possible. So sophomores that by our indication were eligible to apply received an email. If you did not receive that email or you can't find it, just email Global and we'll help get you connected to the right person. So I'm going to shut off the slides, and then Deb, our program coordinator, will start with questions.
Hi, first question is there a specific level Spanish course at WPI that students need to complete in order to apply to the centers that require Spanish? Or can the course be completed prior to the project term? Professor Traver, I'm going to ask you to start off our conversation there because I know that there's a requirement for Spanish for your site.
You're muted.
Competent at least at the advanced 1 level here at WPI. So sometimes people come to it because they've grown up in Spanish speaking households. Others have gone right through the core classes. But when I say that's a basic, the Spanish is total in Paraguay to the extent that the presentations at the end of the term are given in Spanish to a Spanish speaking audience, that one of the copies of the executive summary has to be written in Spanish. So when I say advanced 1, that will make it possible for you to get around in the restaurants. But when it comes into, problem solving in a project session with the sponsors, you might be able to pick up on what's going on, but you'll need one of the more fluent Spanish speakers to help you out. It's quite a high level.
Thank you, Professor Traver. Does anyone else have something to add about the Spanish that you haven't already added? Okay, thanks.
I'll add that for the Ecuador Project Center, we also require a bit of Spanish preparation and a cultural preparation before coming. So for the Spanish prep, we ask that you take at least 1 Spanish class from WPI in one of the 2 terms preceding travel. So we offer both C and D terms. So if you're traveling in C, we want you to take a Spanish class in A or B term. And if you're traveling in D term, we want you to take a Spanish class in C or D. There's not a minimum level that you have to require that you have to take. We do also, if you can't get it into your schedule, we have an online option, but that is not our first choice for what you would have to do.
Professor Elgert, did you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, I would add that as Professor Traver was saying, we have some pretty Spanish intensive year-end requirements. So you have to do your poster, we do a poster presentation at the end that you have to do in Spanish. And usually the presentations are in Spanish too. And it has been just really, really very heartwarming to see the students really actually grasp this and be able to do it. Even we've had students that start with very little Spanish, and by the end they're doing it, and not in perfect Spanish and not even maybe in good Spanish, but they're doing it and it's appreciated. And I think that's what we're after, is for people to try. And so there's no specific level people need to achieve, but if you come to the Ecuador Project Center, you need to want to improve your Spanish no matter what level it is. So please apply if you're a beginner, but only if you're looking to improve your Spanish. We also create teams that are mixed Spanish ability. So, we try to, in one team, we will have an advanced and a beginner and an intermediate, et cetera. So we try to mix the abilities within the team so that, while people are learning, others can kind of pick up the slack in certain regards. But
Great, thank you. And Professor Sekulich.
So I will just mention briefly, Panama does not have any requirement. I'm not going to ask you about that or anything like that. Your experience in Panama will be better if you, take one class the year before, if you do Duolingo, if you start trying to learn somehow. With only English, you can hang out in Panama City and have a lovely time, as I have done on many occasions. If you want to go out to the rainforest hikes in Bocas del Toro, you'll maybe need to know a little bit or get real friendly with one of the other students that does speak it. But I think more important than being grammatically correct or having a big vocabulary is the attitude. Like, I do not speak any Spanish, but when I go into a restaurant, they know I want a hamburguesa because I'm not worried about looking foolish in front of the guy serving me my hamburguesa sin cebolla. But there are students that have good Spanish, and then they can't bring themselves to try it out because they're terrified of making an error. So whatever you can do to nurture a little bit of vocabulary and grammar and that positive attitude that I'm going to roll out into town and do my best and see what happens, you will end up getting ripped off by a taxi driver. But that's universal in Latin America. But those things really are what will be best for your experience aside from the requirements. Don't think there's no requirement. I'm going to Panama.
Taxi prices are set in the city of Cuenca. So actually you won't get ripped off by a taxi driver in the city. Just saying.
I have been ripped off in every corner of this earth. And the last time I was in Panama, the jerk got $20 out of me. He must be like a magician. I don't know how he did it.
Thank you. For our next question, other than a language requirement, what are the important criteria you're looking for in an applicant? And Aaron, would you like to start off?
So in a previous session, Peter Hansen said it very eloquently that you're not applying to any of our individual sites. You're applying to the entire program. And each center director will have a different answer for this. Some want high GPA and good language skills. Some of them don't care. Some of them, you got to be the captain of the football team. Yes, I know that's a general example. I don't actually know which site has that requirement. Me personally, I'm definitely on one end of the spectrum in that the only thing I care about is enthusiasm. I have had some straight up brain surgeons go to Panama and do a lousy job. And I have had some students with just bad grades, a lousy GPA, no experience on their resume. They never worked on a team. But for whatever reason, they were gassed up to do their project and it was exceptional. I'm of the opinion, really, it's the motivation and the enthusiasm that counts above all other things combined by a mile. Maybe someone on the other end of the spectrum should say something.
I guess I'll add, I prioritize language. I'm not going to get 24 native speakers. So the pool that ends up showing up in the end is, it's a mix. Like Professor Elgert said, we will mix the teams accordingly. But I would prioritize language because we all need to have Spanish speakers on our site. But as Professor Sekulic said, great grades are not my priority because they don't determine how well you cope and interact in Costa Rica and how well you work with your team.
I'll just mention real quickly in the pause that as Professor Sekulic said, you're applying to the program as a whole. So if you want some more information about the two-step process of the application, please go back and watch the town hall video or go to that Plus off-campus IQP link where you can find more information about the process. The two-step process is such that you will complete your application and then you'll complete your preference form where you'll have the opportunity to rate all 58 site and term options available to you next year. So we go into detail about how that looks, and that rating form will open tomorrow. Deb, I think we have a question in the chat.
We do. Can you speak more to how projects are driven by the community? Professor Kalinsky, would you like to start us off there?
Sure. So at the Ecuador Project Center, we work with a large variety of community organizations, and they actually come to us. They request that we work with them, and they are the ones that determine or primarily determine the project that you'll be working on. So we know that we're meeting a real need of the community. They're the ones who say, listen, this is what we're working on. This is how can your students help us, or what can they do in this circumstance? When I was there last C-term, I met with a couple of potential new sponsors. One of them they do hippotherapy, right? So therapy with horses for people with learning disabilities and different issues. And in Ecuador, there are lots of organizations with a lot of need, right? So we figure out what kind of thing our students can do that would best of use to them based on what their needs are. And we have probably, I would say, 30 different organizations we've worked with in the last 3 years, and we kind of rotate through. We often have sponsors who come back and say, can you do 2 projects with us this year? So we really are looking to meet their needs. We're not saying, listen, we have a group of students and this is what we want to do for you. We wait for them to tell us and come up with a project proposal, and then we see what kind of fit we can make for the needs of our students. Lorraine, did you want to add on to that?
Go ahead, Professor Traver.
Who?
Oh, sorry, we have a couple of hands up. Why don't we start with Professor Traver?
Yeah, I thought that was a nice question. How does the community drive it? And similar to what has been said, the project is more or less specified by the community, but the idea of a community driving a project becomes a very interesting question of communication, because sometimes, at least in Paraguay, a community thinks it wants something. For instance, say, well, we want you to devise a better water supply system. And, a North American engineering team goes, oh, we know how to do that. And then pretty soon as you begin to discuss it, you realize it's far more cultural and far more sort of local in terms of what materials are available and things like maintenance. And community driving it is driving it also through the way they communicate. In Paraguay, for instance, a lot of times meetings are what North Americans call very circular. And you can get to the end of an hour and say to yourself, what exactly is being asked for? So the community is deriving it through also the way it operates in the world, as well as some specific structure or specific service that it's determined. Once again, that's why the Spanish is so important, and why it's really important for a student to be able to be flexible in terms of what exactly is the target that we're shooting for. Because in the iteration between the team and the community, often the team redefines or learns something that it didn't know about the project that it thought it wanted. And so it changes. And so the community is driving it because you're actually in an interaction or an iteration with the community. And it can sometimes be very frustrating for North American engineers. But that's a nice question. I mean, that's basically what IQP is about. How does the technology and the society sort of interact?
And Professor Sekulich?
So in Panama, we are somewhat lucky in that we have a lot of WPI alumni that live in Panama. If you are a rich Panamanian and your child wants to become an engineer, you send them to Worcester for some reason. So every year, they're never ready for that first winter. Incidentally, every one of them has a story about the first winter in Worcester. So every year I reach out to the alumni network. I reach out to all of the partners that we've worked on projects with in past years. Some of them have their own projects that they send to me. Some of them, they say, we don't want to do a project this year, but my buddy runs this organization. That's how we got teamed up with the parish this year. It was a recommendation from somebody we worked with in the past. And what I really want to stress is that while the projects are community driven, these are not USAID projects. You are not going there to dig a latrine or something or produce some building that they need. You are there to work with the community. And And the end goal is for you to learn how to do a project, how to understand the concepts of the IQP, about how technology impacts the various stakeholders. So optimally, in our projects, you learn from the community, and the results of your learning are something that can be of use to the community. But this is absolutely not a charity volunteer weekend trip, so you can come back with a bunch of photos with you with the little babies in the rural village, and oh, I built them a water tank on the roof of the house or whatever. It is a learning experience, not a manufacturing experience.
Thank you, professors. I think that's it for our questions right now. I don't know if students have anything else that they'd like to ask before we leave. Looks like that's it. Thank you all.
Thank
Great,
you to
I'll just-
everybody for setting this up, to Erin and Julie and Candace and Deb and Dawn and Gary.
You're very welcome. We're glad to do it, and we hope that this this experience gives you the opportunity to see our directors in person, even though we can't be in our big rec center at the moment. So if you do have more questions, you can go back to eProjects, you can come to Global, or you can also look these directors up and shoot them an email too if you have specific questions for them. So thanks everybody for your time, and we'll close it out.